We have with us today the leads of all the Austin and the Southwest region-based innovation organizations here in Austin, Texas. So what I'd like to do is a couple of things, some ground rules. One, I sat through quite a few of the organizational pitches today, a lot of the tracks, and acronyms have absolutely just been the bane of our existence. So we're gonna go ahead and put the tip jar later. So if you hit an acronym, you got to drop some money in on the backside, right? And I'm all in on that as well. So we'll see how many acronyms we can avoid during this time period. So what we're going to talk about today is how do you actually engage with, and then how do we make the community of defense innovation better by working together? We've learned a lot of things over the last 2.5, 3 years here in Austin, Texas about how we've been doing innovation. And that stretches all the way back to the very first visit by Ash Carter, the Secretary of Defense at the time. And so it's become very much more mature. A lot of our organizations are available to us. And so we're fortunate today to have a good conversation. From my closest to furthest away, we have we have Martin from AFWorks. We have Jay from the Army Applications Lab, Andrea from the Defense Innovation Unit, and Jim, of course, the host today, who has done most of the talking and most of the hosting duties here at the National Security Innovation Network track. Noticing I didn't say NSIN, because that's an acronym.
There you go.
All right. So with that, what I'd like to do is we're going to start off. Normally we do all the bios, but we just want to get right to it. And quite frankly, I think if you've been here over the last 2 days, you've had an opportunity to sit on some of the panels and some of the other activities and the Q&As that have occurred today. So what I'd like to do is start off, and then we'll start with the first one. We'll go from left to right. We'll go Air Force first, all right? So first question to kind of lead us off. We've talked about innovation today. We've talked about sometimes it's problem-driven innovation. Sometimes it's capabilities-driven innovation. How do you strike that right balance for which way you're going to go? Whether you want capabilities, and that's going to drive concepts and drive what you do inside the service, or whether it's like, I have a very specific kind of problem and I want a new approach to that problem set. Start with you, Martin. What do you think?
I appreciate that. That's at the key of where the Air Force has approached their small business innovation and research funding, right? So the SIBR funding, as we call it. Right now, our balance is 60% open topic, and 20% of it is a specific topic, and then 20% other, right? So what it comes down to is it depends on the problem space you're trying to avoid. So instead of looking at it as the problem that you're trying to solve, it's the problem space you're trying to avoid. And one of the things that we're looking to do by having an open topic in that regard is making sure you're not missing the technology that you weren't even thinking of or dreaming of or imagining that potentially has a significant impact. So if you look back, one of the lessons we really learned was for DJI drones back in 2006 when that kicked off. If I would have taken that same drone and brought it to a senior leader in the Air Force and said, "Hey, what is the capability here? How do we take this into the warfighter's hand and get value?" I don't think that vision would have been there, right? I probably would have gotten kicked out of the door. If I would have taken that same drone, for example, and brought it to, let's call it a technical sergeant out on the field and said, "Hey, well, how do you think you would have used this?" I bet you they would have said, "Hey, instead of using this lift device to do a tail inspection of this aircraft, which would take me 30 to 45 minutes, in the same time, I could use a drone to do a tail inspection of, 7 aircraft." And that's the power, I think, of balancing those two things. Now, an open topic, I would capture a potential capability like that versus a specific topic, I may have missed it. But on the opposite side, a specific topic probably has a more deliberate pathway to transition to a program versus an open topic. You have to find that pathway.
That's great.
Well, one, again, thanks for being here. I kind of take a little bit different approach in terms of how we view this from an Army perspective. So all the services have concepts. I mean, you have an activity that is shaping whatever your next tranche or set of operational rules that you're going to deal with. There's some kind of future concept that we all deal with. Now, we tend to focus a little bit closer in on the problem sets, and that's just kind of by design in terms of how we focus. Problem sets that are facing your current force often can be used to inform concepts down the road. So this is it's a tactical choice that we made versus kind of what Martin's team did. We understand what the Army futures concepts are or capabilities that are driven from those concepts. Like, we would like to fight like this or operate like this. Therefore, there's a capability required to do that. So that kind of gives you some buckets and lanes. Now, you can apply that to what you're doing today. And what we really like doing is getting down to the end users and understanding their problems and working it back up. the beauty of kind of how AFC is organized with FCC, or the future concepts element, the actual folks looking at like Army 2035, if you will, they are part and parcel of Army Futures Command, aligned with the development team, and then we crosshatch over to the actual acquisition and procurement functions in the Army. So we have an opportunity to work through problems-based activities, really going after things that are pain points now to inform requirements and then inform the pathways we're getting to capabilities. Now that's a small snapshot. That's not how the Army does it writ large. It's really how we look at our problem set, kind of from the innovation space and in the defense, kind of the DoDX community, if you will.
Jay, just on that, just to follow up, do you have a balance? I know, it's like, hey, we're 60%, we kind of 20 and 20. Do you kind of have a balance in your mind?
There is, and the way we've balanced that out is we basically kind of cheated, and we took a hybrid approach of, we have buckets that we go after, and they're very broad perspective. We don't have like the traditional like broad area announcement type activity, but we'll have lanes that we operate in that kind of align to capabilities. So again, we're trying to kind of get a Goldilocks zone in there, and we think, and frankly, it's a bandwidth issue. You only have so many resources, one being time and effort, right? So to get the best return on investment, we really try to use that as an initial filtration point. So we do take a broad approach. That's what everything fits in, but there's lanes or categories that we try to neck it down into very quickly. Good comments, by the way, on the SBIR process, or the Small Business Innovation Research process. We also have a very similar model, but we tend to pick very, very ruthlessly in terms of where we spend that money at. The Air Force, of all the services, has probably the largest SBIR raw dollar amount, and we just have different tactics on how we arrive at it. But we actually get a lot of lessons from AFWorks on how that's applied, but we turn that into really, really specific ways that we want to do business for the Army. But it's good opening.
And there's a comment that you bring up on that, like Air Force broadly attacks. I mean, there's thousands of companies that have gone and attacked Air Force servers. They're going in, they're getting the phase one, they're getting the phase two, and they have that opportunity. One of the things I think the Army does really well, I think that this is a testament to AAL, is that you go and talk to the PEOs and shape what some of those requirements are on, and that's into the tip jar. Dang it!
It's all right. I'm tracking.
So it goes to
I'm
the
just
program
relying upon
managers.
the viewers to let us know in the chat window how many times we're using acronyms.
So as the requirements come in, AAL really comes in and says, we're going to tackle that, and we're going to walk the dog all the way from beginning to end. And I think that's really where the two organizations between AAL and AFWorks begin to learn and show. AFWorks, from a marketing perspective, and getting the community at large to participate, has been, I don't know if this would be what it is without what AFWorks is. Like, I think that,
I would agree with that.
Thank you for that, because I would say that we were actually, we both work together. Jay and I work really close together. And we're trying to, continue that. And I would say we're learning that from the Army also. You mentioned all the community that we bring in. We have just under $1 billion of the small business innovation and research funds. That equates to about 1,400 companies we onboard a year. That's a lot, right? So what we'd have to do, and this is one of the challenges we talk about practically daily, is I think the Army model of setting those organizations up early and then sort of mating them to a pathway to a program office is very important. What we end up having to do, though, is now you have to be very careful at choosing within that ecosystem which ones you think have the most potential towards one of those. So that's something we're thinking a lot about right now. I mean,
a good analogy that we kick around kind of internally, if you look at the way the Army and the Air Force does business, and I would actually extrapolate this out a little bit to DIU with a slightly different perspective. If you want to build a car, you have an industrial process. You can go buy a Ford F-150 out of a plant in Dearborn that's producing several thousand a year, like per month almost, probably. That's probably more the AFWorks model. You get a quality product, putting a broad spectrum activity out there, and you're getting a lot of different use cases for what happens there. We are probably more like a custom car builder. So instead of making up numbers here, 1,000 things over a given amount of time, we'll do 100. But what it drives is a different set of tactics in terms of how you want to apply that money. And to Jim's point, that's actually one of the things we're trying to collude better on, is understanding how they operate with these broad announcements, but that bespoke sort of like team building capacity, we bring that advocacy model. So I'm not putting 1,000 performers on in a year. I'm putting, let's say 200 on, like it's probably more like 150. We want every one of them to win. Like that's not necessarily a very ruthless DARPA down select. You want all of them to be successful because you're going to get much better holistic product out of that. So our model is not say we're out, we do milestones, come back. We look for every time we put $1 onto somebody, we want that to turn into $10, $100 worth of value back. So it's everybody wants the same thing. It's just two different ways of getting there.
So that's great from a service perspective. Let's look a little bit at the OSD level. Andrea, any thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, sure. So from a DIU perspective, we're not requirements-based at all. So we're problem-based. So then that's what we leverage our partnerships across the military and then the relationships that we have with commercial companies and venture capitalists and really the private equity community. And what we do is we have a unique CSO process. And so then that's how we go ahead and get those problems
And what's
out.
a CSO?
Commercial Solutions Opening. Thank you for keeping me out of the chip jar. I appreciate it. So for record. That's great. No, so that's what we do. And so then we get those CSOs out and you can find them on the www.diu.mil website. That's how we post them quickly. And then we close within about 2 weeks. So that keeps that fast and competitive process going. So then after the CSO, that's how we, search for those answers to those problems. And then those commercial companies that can answer those problems, they'll reach back into us. And then we look at how their approach to solving that problem. And the requirements are quite limited, right? So we only ask for a 5-page paper or a 15-page slide deck presentation to highlight how are you going to solve the problem that we have, right? And so then that's how we get after it. And so it's a problem-based approach to solving those problems that are really, quite frankly, the national security problems that we all face. And that's important.
Great. What about National Security Innovation Network there, Jim? How do you do it? And I know you have great programs like Hacking for Defense and other things, right? So how do you approach that?
So a couple things, very similar model to DIU. It's problem-based. So we start with what's the problem? This is the catalyst behind all movement at NSIN. And really that problem statement comes from one of the components. It comes from Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, or Coast Guard. That's where it all begins. And then I think one of the distinctions that we see is that you begin looking at the pathway for a company, right? You look at a pathway for a company as you look at these 4 organizations up here. The way that you can think about NSIN is NSIN's your TRL, your technology readiness level from 0 to 6. What's your idea? Do you have a prototype? How can we create that initial open door? Can we get you that initial stakeholder to work with us? And then what that helps is then we start looking at AFWERX and we start looking at AL and say, we can de-risk your investment. We can de-risk this initial stakeholder that maybe a phase 2 can't go find. So maybe we go do a prototype on the front end so that when that company applies for a phase 1 or when that company applies for a phase 2, they already have a bought-in stakeholder or that bought-in sponsor who can now go and engage, answer those questions of this is who I'm going to work with inside of the DoD. I've already mapped it out. And now that's going to, I think when it comes down to the amount of energy that it takes to go find that sponsor, now we can start looking at, are there other components that can leverage this? Like in big areas like energy or autonomous systems or cybersecurity. Those are all shared experiences across each of the components.
Just to pull on that just for a minute, because everybody mentioned your processes, your balance. It's interesting to see the difference between the two. Prioritization. How do you decide where you're going to focus your efforts, right? I mean, does that differ amongst the organizations as well?
For NSIN, where we start with our priority is based off of, in order to engage, a better way of describing this is what we don't want. What we don't want is a soldier who comes to us and says, I have this amazing idea, and they don't have a commander who's bought in. Or even worse, they haven't even spoken to him to say, how do we get this idea or this innovation to move forward? So what that moves into is a lot of coaching around how do we get commanders to listen to the soldiers, or how do we have soldiers shape ideas in a way that a commander understands what the problem set is and what to do with it. Because the other challenge set there is, how do we help an E4 or a brand new lieutenant understand what are the acquisitions processes that they need to know at their level to help facilitate a little bit of momentum on their side. And I think those are some of the pieces that you start looking at that help drive some of that movement.
Right.
Yeah. So I'll go. So at DIU, we have a culture aspiration of making an impact, a big impact. And I think that's where some of our priorities lay, right? So the bigger the impact, the more likely it is to get approved. We have a project decision board that Mr. Brown sits on. So then that's how our projects will be prioritized in DIU. But really the general guidance is through that cultural aspiration of how big of an impact can we make and how quickly can we make that impact. And so that's really those culture aspirations that we tie into through that project decision board.
Yeah, that's great. And you mentioned culture. We'll come back to that in a minute. I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, for us, it's actually pretty simple in terms of prioritization. Like, the Army will have priorities, right? So you acknowledge that and you kind of work off that. What's interesting though is like a lot of times you're not like, it's kind of hard to track back like, hey, how's this helping me, build the next theater ballistic missile or whatever. So we do account for that. When we work with units, it's actually, this is where it's more relevant. You go down to a customer or really an end user, like whoever that warfighter is or that organization is that you're working with. By the way, whether there's a PM, a PEO, 82nd Division Commander,
What's
whoever.
a PM and a PEO?
Two guys I'm going to pay you later for. It's program executive officer and a program manager. So your ASALT, which I don't know that actually means. They're the acquisitions procurement guys. Whether it's those guys or it's literally that warfighter commander, you start with them. So recently we go down to units a lot, like all the time. So we'll go down to a division, say, all right, sir, ma'am, what are your priorities? What are you trying to get after with X, Y, and Z division or corps or SF group? It doesn't matter, whoever their priorities are. They will very quickly rattle off what their priorities are. Like they know them, they will give you slides, it'll be awesome. And then our response is like, awesome, sir, ma'am, give us about 4 days. We're going to go into your organizations. We're going to come back. We're going to start at the very bottom, across the whole lateral cut of your organization. And we're going to get some feedback in terms of what they think their problems are. We're going to come back and in the out brief, we're going to take your priorities and then we're going to take the problems and see how well they overlap. And what we tend to find is that Venn diagram bubble doesn't always add up real nice. And that highlights some different things about the organization to whoever those people are. And we're agnostic to this too, by the way. It's just, hey, we're trying to figure out like what are the priorities we want to go after in a given organization. Once you show that to a commander, they will uniformly, in our experience, say, okay, all right, these are Army level priorities. These are big things. We need to do these things. But now I'm adjusting the time horizons or my expectations, or perhaps like adding some new things. You rarely do you see a commander's priorities like drop off. You'll add to that, or you'll change the order that it happens. And then the following question is like, sir, now that you've done that, okay, what do you want me to work on first for you? What is most important right now? Because we're time driven. So we want to work on right now problems. And then that's how we generate like at the fundamental level of doing work, prioritization. And then to be honest with you, we have a whole meticulous process, which we all do. It's a little bit different. We're actually talking about harmonizing this a little bit better. How relevant is the capability? How mature is the capability? Can I get a win? Can I get this faster? Can I get it across the finish line into a sustained state in the force with a transition partner? Better, faster, stronger. You make a lot of business case decisions as you go through that, but it really starts with the customer base. What are their priorities? And then illuminating their problems back, reframing.
That's great. Thanks. Martin?
Yeah. So, when we have an organization like ours that's, not as specific and focused, right? And we are more broadly open. And, again, we have a pool of resources that's a little bit different. We look at priorities a little bit differently, right? So the big part of that is, honestly, when we have to think about what are we doing and how is that focused, it really is it's focused on our near peer adversary, right? So what is our near peer adversary doing? How can we be disruptive in that environment, help the Air Force become, maybe hopefully the DoD, become more effective in innovation. So the way our organization is also set up is we have 3 different lines of effort. We have, you've probably heard a lot from these different panels about Spark. So that's more of the innovation within our organization, within the Air Force. We have our ventures department, which looks at partnership with industry. And then we have what we call Prime, which specifically tries to transition a specific technology and that sort of thing. So among those three things, we don't really have a prioritization of those. But when we have to think about all of them, we tend to lean back towards trying to grow the defense industrial base, keeping in mind what we can do to keep our technological leadership in the globe, and those lines of effort that lead in that direction tend to take priority for us.
Yeah. So thanks for that. So earlier today and across several times I'm engaging with startups, and it's a great conversation because many times, haven't worked with the Department of Defense before, right? Which is great because that's literally the target audience that you're trying to draw in. You want to increase the number of folks that want to be interested in national security. As I talk to them, they'll say, listen, I've had a great engagement with AFWERX, or I've had one with AAL, or maybe Naval X, right, who is not represented today. What if it's actually something that might be applicable across services? Or maybe there's an interest in the agencies at the OSD, or the Office of Secretary of Defense level. What makes it useful? I mean, we're all here on this panel. We're all here in Austin, Texas. Jim, I'm going to start with you. What makes it useful to work together as kind of a DoD X community, right? We're all in the same space. And why do you think, or how do you think that helps us be more competitive, more nationally or internationally?
Well, I think that collectively, all the people that are on this panel are incredibly intelligent, driven, and want to make change. And I think that each organization has different focuses, right? And I think that Jay brings up something where it comes down to, as we engage with DoD partners who can line up, this is our priority. I think the main thing is, previous to really, I think this year, which we've put a lot of effort behind, what does it look like to do joint innovation? I know senior leaders are being asked by DSD, what are we doing? What are we doing that's joint? And I think senior leaders are like, okay, well, we finally heard you. We'll move forward. We'll go kick over this bucket and we'll figure it out. And I think it starts with opening the door and saying, here's when we're going to go engage. And if we're going to go talk to First Cav, whether or not you can join, we'll let you know what happened. Or whether or not we go talk to 16th Air Force, we'll let you know what happened. And then also me saying, if you have an interesting project that DIU wants to potentially prototype on the front end to see if something's possible, we're now just starting to understand how this pipeline really works. And I think that that's where, in my opinion, that this begins to work, especially with the programs we have and with the teams that we have and the dollars that are being executed.
Andrea, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. So our mission, as we think we know, is we work to strengthen national security. I think collectively we're all aimed to do that. DIU differentiates in the way that we adopt commercial technology, and then because we are OSD, we try and scale that across the services. And so I think that as we work to grow the national security innovation base, that's something we keep in mind. And core DIU is on the more mature end of that TRL. And so then that's one of the things that we work, and we have six portfolios or technology focus areas that we dig into. And so I think that as we learn how, and each of us have the different capabilities and we work together, that's where we gain those efficiencies. And so then in Austin specifically, we have a DoDX roundup meeting that we all talk and we are transparent about the projects that we're working on to improve that collaboration. I think that that's something that's very special happening here in Austin. So we continue to do that, and that helps leverage those relationships across the military.
And just to follow up on this first, so if I'm a startup and I've already engaged with one element of you, is that kind of in saying, hey, then we're making sure that all of our DoDX compatriots know that capability and that startup exists?
That is definitely the goal. So I would say the short answer is that's where we all want to be, and we're getting better with every rep to do that. But are we there yet? No. But I'd kind of offer this. You said something kind of important a minute ago, Jim, in terms of like the kind of people that are the action figures right now across the circuit. By the way, with our peers not here too, by the way, almost uniformly. Pretty much all of us spend our entire adult life in combat, either there, coming back, getting ready, going back, whether you're a pilot, you're on the ground, you're doing whatever. And that ultimately is a very pure experience of problem solving with high risks, high risk, high stakes. And that's really what's going on. So what we're all really doing is like I would talk to him and say, hey man, I want you to pull them. Sorry. Hey man, I need help. It's okay.
Talking with your hands.
How do we, I do that. How do we solve a problem together right now on the spot? So the same mechanisms we were using in Afghanistan, Iraq, Malaysia, Africa for the last 15, 20 years, that's literally all we're doing. And it's really hard unless you do the work. That's really where it comes down to. But for startups, like I would tell you, one, have your first meeting, and then just ask a lot of questions, because all of us are vested in you being successful. Like this is the layer, just the startup small business layer, the non-traditionals, which by the way can be a big company, just a non-traditional partner. You want them highly engaged with the defense sector, and you want them to be interested and eager to do that. You want them competitive every time they put a proposal in, not just take a flyer on something to get like a little bit of SBIR money to stay alive. You want them excited and eager to work. And our job is really to build that. Like every time, even people that don't get selected, all of us like provide feedback to them, because we want them to come back and like help them through that process each time.
Right.
Yeah, and I'll tell you again, you won't find a more unified group with a unity of effort right here in this room, probably more than anywhere else. And that goes along with the entire, we call it the DoDX community. So it's the Department of Defense Innovation community. There's a lot of unity there. So, when we speak in the military, we talk about unity of command versus unity of effort. So unity of command is almost a vertical, right? So everything within a vertical is aligned. I would say the one thing that in the innovation community that we haven't done well, that we are all focused, and all four of us have been kind of talking about that, is instead of thinking, hey, this is the way the Air Force does it, this is the way the Army does it, the Marines, really looking at ways in which we can unify our efforts. So for example, when the company comes to the DoD, they don't honestly care if it's the Army, Navy, Marine. If they have a technology that's applicable across, that's where I think we have a lot of work to do to figure out how do we unify that effort across all this. And I know that's pretty much your missions of on that side. But I would say our services are have a little bit of, I would say, improvement to go in that regard. So I know Jay and I have talked a lot about that, and a lot of the senior leaders who come visit us are thinking about it, and that's a place where I think there's a lot of room for growth and opportunity.
Yeah. There's one thread I wanted to pull on that too.
Please.
I think that a really good example of this, we got to talk about Icon, right?
Yeah.
Icon's a great example.
Beautiful.
SBIR StratFi company on AFWorks dollars, supported by a Army base in the Texas Military Department, who now General Daly came down and said, hey, we really want to use this tool. Army General Daly. So 4-star General Daly said, hey, this is really interesting. However, that wouldn't happen unless we had Air Force personnel saying, hey, we really want to do this. And then looking at the broader Army portion saying, hey, I think that we can use this.
And in Texas and in Austin, right?
Yeah.
Having all of us here together is why that came together.
That's right. That's right. And I would offer, just from an observer here, I would offer it's a pivot. You would expect a startup to have a pivot as they understand the marketplace better and understand what their stakeholders are demanding of them and what the users need. And they pivot into that spot more cleanly. It's a superpower of a startup, agility. And I think we're seeing that here. We've got a couple minutes left. Again, in the vein of, we have a lot of startups, entrepreneurs, folks, maybe non-traditionals, to Jay's point, that are participating for the first time. What's one thing that you would suggest to them now that we've had 2 days of Fed Supernova, a lot of information, a lot of panels? By the way, I think they're all going to be YouTube, so you can go back out there and watch them at your leisure at home. What's one thing that you would suggest to them? Say, hey, you know what? Go home, and if you're going to start out your tactical action plan here, this would be a place that I'd really kind of tell you to at least take a look at before you move too far. Who wants to go first? I won't make Martin go. Martin ended.
I'll start us off. I think the thing that to any entrepreneur or any business who's engaging with the DoD is it's not much different than a commercial market. You have to see somebody who has a demand for your product. You have to be able to highlight their pain point that will make them want to buy it. I think those are the two most important things that are not different than any business. And at the end of the day, it's like we don't operate much different than them. We just wear a uniform and we have a couple different mission sets. So I think that it takes you understanding a little bit about the business of who you're trying to work with, and then looking at what's the smallest step that we can do to go help them and prove out that you can solve that pain. I think that's the initial step. And that's something you can do through NSIN. That's something you can start off right off the bat and de-risk some of the time that these guys are doing.
The Capital Factory itself is actually really good at helping people work through that too. Just like the work that they do here is actually, they're exceptional at that.
Right. Andre, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, sure. I would encourage everyone to apply for the CSOs. And really, even if you're at that higher end of the TRL, go out there, put in your application, 5-page white paper, 15-page pitch deck, and you really get the feedback. So even if you're wondering if you're going to be able to be competitive or not, I just encourage everyone to do that, to apply and then get the feedback. And then that way your company is going to be better and then potentially more competitive for the next round.
That's
So
great
that would be
advice.
my one piece of advice.
Great advice. You got to get in the ring in order to compete.
That's
Yep.
right.
Jay?
Yeah. Very, very quickly, just to echo a little bit of what Jim said, do your homework. So understand what your value is and what you're proposing, and be very, very honest with yourself on how it could apply. Seek knowledge that you don't have. Context for our application is usually what the number one thing that's lacking. Where we grade you on is when your proposal comes back and it's clear you have good capability, but you can't communicate that. I can't go off gut feeling. I have to go off the receipts, right? So do your homework. Don't let hubris be an enemy. Be a learning organization. You're going to fail a lot, or you're going to get told no a lot. Every time you get told no, say, hey, thanks, I appreciate it. Can you give me feedback? And we will all do that.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing you do in the private industry. If you do that enough, you will win. Like overnight success takes 10 years, right?
Mhm.
Like that's in DoD too.
Martin?
Yeah, everything that Jay said was right on target. So a lot of I was going to say the same. My call sign's Riddler, so I would always encourage them to ask a lot of questions. So totally love that, and I would say just keep at it. Tenacity, because we talk about this, right? They are our technological edge, right? The startup. So keep at it. We appreciate everything you guys are doing and the risk you're taking.
Great. Well, everybody, thanks for today. This has been a great couple of days, number one, and a great panel, great way to finish it up.
Yep.
Jim, I just want to say thank you to the National Security Innovation Network for today. I know you did a lot of the duties here, being the masters of ceremony as well as driving it. And I know if you haven't had a chance and you didn't get a chance to go to the Defense Innovation Unit or the Army or the Air Force, I know there were a lot of competing tracks going. Please go out there and check online and see what you missed. I think you'll find that it would be very, very valuable to you, whether you're in the academia, you're in a startup, you're non-traditional, or maybe you're a larger corporation that you're just trying to figure out how do you help out. Because one of the areas we didn't get a chance to talk to today is as entrepreneurs and startups go and work, you're going to want partners in this ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do you go find those partners and understand how those partners can work with you to achieve your aims and what you're looking to do as well. Big thanks to Capital Factory and Josh Bear. I see Jorge Manresa back there. Jorge, thank you very much for today. I know that the whole Capital Factory team, the support staff, it takes a lot to put on 2 days of these kinds of really high-end content-driven conversations. And as if you're like me, it's 2 feet and 15. So you walk 2 feet and you have a 15-minute conversation. So if you've done that a couple of times over the last couple of days, you've really succeeded here. If you're traveling, be safe going home. If you're from Austin, awesome. If you don't live in Austin yet, you need to come talk to us because clearly you need to move to Austin.
We can help you with that.
We can make that happen. All right. With that, everybody, thank you very much. And everybody have a great afternoon.
Yep. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.